With the martyrdom of Joseph and Hyrum in June of 1844, the saints are thrown into turmoil. Mobs are gathering around the city of Nauvoo. The 12 are racing to return. The question of who will take up the mantle of Joseph Smith is on everyone's mind. Over the next 2.5 years, 3 major things occur and drive us into the next period of church history. The first is the succession crisis, the question of who will lead the church now that Joseph is dead. The second is the construction or finishing of the Nauvoo Temple. And the third is the Western migration and flight from Illinois. These things happen generally simultaneously or overlapping in their time periods. The succession crisis does resolve itself first, but the Western migration and the finishing of the Nauvoo Temple occur hand in hand as we move through the next 2.5 years. News of Joseph Smith's death took time to reach the apostles. Joseph had, in, I believe, May, sent out a call for the apostles to return to Nauvoo. During this time, shortly before his death, the 12 apostles and Sidney Rigdon and others had been sent out on the campaign trail, campaigning for Joseph Smith as President of the United States. Sidney Rigdon was in Pennsylvania. Brigham Young and a couple of the other apostles had gone into Boston and New England. Others had gone into the southern states. There were, I believe, 2 that were in the western states, fairly close to Nauvoo. In Nauvoo, Willard Richards and John Taylor are there because they were with Joseph Smith when he died. When they get the news of Joseph Smith's death, Sidney Rigdon sends a letter to Brigham Young in which he basically summons the apostles to him so that they can have a meeting in Pennsylvania. I believe he's in Pittsburgh, and he can reorganize things, basically. He doesn't state it directly, but it is him asserting his authority, saying, I'm going to be the next leader, so you come to me. Brigham Young replies to this letter by saying, no, we need to get back to Nauvoo as soon as possible, and detouring down to Pittsburgh will take too long. We are just going to go through the Great Lakes area and get there as fast as we can. Basically, Brigham Young is saying, I'm not recognizing your authority, Sidney. We're going to Nauvoo. Sidney Rigdon also then heads to Nauvoo. Sidney gets there first. When he arrives, there are 4 apostles now in Nauvoo. As I said, Willard Richards and John Taylor were there because they were with Joseph Smith when he died. George Albert Smith and Parley P. Pratt were in the western states and are able to come to Nauvoo very quickly. So we have 4 apostles here when Sidney Rigdon arrives. Rigdon makes an alliance with William Marks, who is the stake president of Nauvoo. And they start setting things in motion to have Sidney appointed the new leader of the church. Although Sidney Rigdon doesn't want to be the new president, he is appointing himself as guardian of the church, because only Joseph Smith can really be the president of the church. He's just going to be in guardian. He does agree to meet with the apostles, but when the meeting is supposed to take place, it's like the 5th, they appoint a meeting, he doesn't show up. And he's found arguing with some other people in the town instead of meeting with the apostles that are there. And without having a meeting with the apostles, he sets up a church-wide meeting for the 8th of August, in which his plan is to have himself voted as leader of the church and guardian of the saints. The apostles are very much opposed to this. They do eventually meet with him and to get a big argument, and that it is agreed that the meeting will still take place, but there will not be a vote called. It is on the 6th of August that Brigham Young and those that were traveling with him finally arrive in Nauvoo. They hear about what's happening, what's going on with Sidney Rigdon. They meet with the 12, and I think there's now 8 of them present. I think Brigham Young and 3 others. It was Heber C. Kimball, I believe Wilfred Woodruff, I cannot remember who the 4th one was, but they all, it's the 8 of the 12 are here. And so they have enough to form a full quorum and actually conduct business officially. And this starts, there's a big tension in the church here. Some are going siding with Sidney Rigdon, some with Brigham Young, and we got these factions forming. There are others too that vie for the leadership of the church. There's actually something like 8 or 9 people who claim to be the next leader of the church. The only two that have a serious following, really, are Brigham Young and the Apostles and Sidney Rigdon. On the 7th, there is a meeting with the Apostles. They also meet with William Clayton. I don't think he's an apostle, but during this time, after Joseph Smith's death up to this point, the two men who have been the primary leaders of the church in Nauvoo have been William Clayton and Willard Richards. Willard Richards was the most senior apostle, and so he was the one to guide the saints spiritually, while William Clayton was the agent, the financial agent of Joseph Smith and the church, and so he handled the properties and the financial situation of the church during this time. And because of this, he had a lot of friction with Emma, because Emma kept trying to claim a lot of things, a lot of possessions as hers. Because Joseph Smith, in the last year or so, had kind of blurred the lines between what belonged to him personally and what belonged to the church, and so there was some argument over what went where. Of these two factions that form, as I say, Brigham Young and Sidney Rigdon are our two primary factions. Sidney Rigdon has on his side William Marks, who was the stake president. He also gets Emma Smith to support him, largely because these people are joined in their rejection of plural marriage. None of them like the doctrine of plural marriage. They're not really united in anything except in their rejection of plural marriage. Then you have the other faction of Brigham Young and the Apostles, but they have what has come to be known as the last charge, where Joseph Smith met with the Apostles about a month before he was killed, and he told them that they were the highest authority in the church after himself, and that he conferred on them all the keys necessary to lead the church, and commissioned them, gave them their last charge to keep the saints together, to lead the saints into the future, because he knew he was in. Joseph Smith knew his time was up. And so he gives this last charge to the apostles. Brigham Young reminds the apostles of this last charge. He also tells others that Joseph Smith had given them this last charge, that he had told them that they were the highest authority in the church after his death. And so we have these two factions. One is really, as I say, united only in rejecting the last doctrines that Joseph Smith taught. And the other is saying, we are the foundation. We are the ones that Joseph Smith anointed and appointed to take his place. We are following Joseph Smith. The others are rejecting Joseph Smith. Now, Brigham Young wanted to call a solemn assembly, which is what is required for appointing a new president. It's been done since the beginning, and he wanted to call it on the 13th. It was agreed, it was all getting set up, but Rigdon still called his meeting on the 8th. And even though he said he wouldn't call for a vote, he did try to call for a vote on the 8th. Now, on the 8th, there was going to be another meeting of the apostles. That meeting was supposed to start at about 9 o'clock. Rigdon's meeting started at 10. Brigham Young never went to the meeting of the apostles, but was in the spirit drawn to Rigdon's meeting, where Rigdon called for a vote. And then as soon as Rigdon had finished that, Brigham Young stood up, told the saints, this is not how this is done, and if you are so desperate to get the vote called, let us organize a solemn assembly this afternoon, 2 p.m. We can all come together as it is supposed to be. We won't wait until the 13th. We'll just do it now. They agree. They actually started about 3 p.m. instead of 2 p.m. as was originally planned, and there are no written records of this meeting. We do have journal entries from later years where the saints would reminisce about it, but no record was kept at the time. But it is at this meeting Brigham Young speaks for 2 or 3 hours. Sidney Rigdon follows him with a very brief thing, but since Sidney Rigdon had preached in the morning for about 2 hours, he's feeling a little tired. He asks William W. Phelps to stand up and speak for him. And Phelps stands up and agrees with the apostles and tells everybody that the apostles are the next leaders, not Sidney Rigdon. And Sidney Rigdon gets very mad at him for that. But it is at this meeting that many will testify later that they saw the mantle of Joseph Smith on Brigham Young. Some say they saw Brigham Young appear as if he was Joseph Smith, like he was transfigured to have the appearance of Joseph Smith. Many people said they heard the voice of Joseph Smith instead of the voice of Brigham Young. Others just saw the light of the Spirit shining on Brigham Young. And we have many of these stories testifying of this, and the vast majority of the saints at that point agreed to follow Brigham Young and the apostles. Brigham Young was not yet appointed as president of the church. He is still just the president of the quorum of the 12 apostles. But the saints agree that the apostles, after Joseph Smith, the apostles are the next highest authority, and therefore when Joseph Smith died, the apostles became the leaders of the church. And this is what we call today the succession crisis of 1844. And this is when it was fully established that when the president dies, the quorum of the 12 takes the leadership of the church until a new president is appointed. Now, during all this, we have the construction of the Nauvoo Temple. Of course, the Nauvoo Temple began construction in 1840. They purchased the land, and it was on a large bluff overlooking the Mississippi River, so that it was the most prominent building in Nauvoo when it was constructed. When you come down the Mississippi River, the first thing you'll notice is the Nauvoo Temple. The land was acquired in 1840, and they began construction. They divided the city into 10 wards so that people could give a tithe of their time. In other words, you would have each day, the men living in one ward would work for that day. The next day, the second ward would work. Then the third ward, then the fourth ward, going around until you had 10 days of labor and you'd start over. So 1 in 10 days, every man gave a day of labor to building the temple. In early 1841, we have the first baptisms for the dead performed in the Mississippi River, but God does tell the people that they need to build the temple because the ordinance of baptism for the dead belongs to the temple. God does give them a kind of grace period, saying during these 6 months, you can perform baptisms for the dead in the river, but after the 6-month period is over, no more baptizing for the dead until the temple is done. That deadline comes in October of 1841. The saints then go into overdrive. Instead of just building the temple, they construct a wooden baptismal font built on the back of 12 wooden oxen down in the basement. They dedicate the baptismal font individually, separate from the rest of the temple, and continue the baptisms for the dead. In 1842, the first endowment is performed, but not in the temple. It is performed in the red brick house of Joseph Smith in the attic. That becomes our first endowment room. That's also where the Relief Society is first organized. But again, the endowment ordinance belongs to the temple. So the only ones who received it in the red brick house were the apostles, those higher church leaders who were going to need to have this ordinance before Joseph Smith died. Joseph Smith knew they needed the ordinance before. That was kind of the last thing he did, you might say, one of the last things he does to prepare the apostles for their work after his death. Now in 1845, this is either November 30th or December 1st, it's a little hazy, the attic of the temple is dedicated as an endowment room. And now we start performing endowments for the general membership. And this is from December 1845 to February 1846, 6,000 saints received their endowments in the attic. On January 7th of 1846, the sealing altar for the sealing of husband and wife and families is dedicated. And we get our first sealings. Now, of course, again, the apostles, they were sealed to their wives before, but the ordinance is now available to the general membership because we have that portion of the temple is dedicated. This is the only temple that has been dedicated piecemeal, you might say. We needed the baptismal font for baptisms for the dead. We'll dedicate that while we construct the rest of it. We will dedicate the attic for endowments because we need that. This was done in 1845, late 1845. The saints are going to leave Nauvoo early in 1846. They wanted to get it done so that they could receive their endowments before they had to leave. Same thing with the ceilings. We're dedicating it piece by piece. Sometime in March, they do another dedication that just dedicates the building as far as it is built at this time. But they do the final dedication, which dedicates the entire building as a temple to God, May 1st, 1846. Now, they originally planned this dedication for April 6th as a nice anniversary to the organizing of the church, but the building was not fully completed until late April, and so they do the dedication on May 1st. Of course, the saints then have to flee. By the end of 1846, all the saints are gone from Nauvoo. They do actually try to sell the temple in order to fund the western migration, but they can't find a buyer. Now, in 1848, 2 years later, the temple is burnt by an arsonist. lit on fire. Nobody knows who does it. It's still unknown today. It is assumed that it was done by somebody trying to discourage the saints from coming back, saying, well, if their temple is still here, they may try to return. So we destroy the temple, and they won't come back. Now, a year later, the spring of 1849, well, not a year, about 6 months later, because it was October 9th, 1848, they burned the temple. In the spring, the temple is sold to French Icarians, which is a religious group from France who just moved into the area, and they're going to convert the shell that remains of the building into a communal building, a school, meeting house for the community. As they are refitting it, they're putting the roof on May 27th, 1850, a tornado goes through and collapses most of what was left of the building, and the project is abandoned. It is about a year later that the city actually orders the remaining, I think it's the west wall was still standing, and the city orders it demolished as a danger to the city. So it is knocked over. And from that point on, the building site, the rubble, is harvested for its stone and resources to build houses and factories and stores and stuff throughout the town. And over the years, by 1870, there's nothing left. The whole place has been cleared. So that is the history of the original Nauvoo Temple. Now let us talk about the Western migration. See, after the succession, mobs increase. They surround the city and are threatening the saints if the saints don't leave. The apostles actually start to organize the Exodus, with the plan of it being that they will leave in the spring of 1846. The city charter, which had been granted in 1839, is repealed in January of 1845. Now, part of the charter was the Nauvoo Legion. So once the charter is repealed, the Nauvoo Legion is disbanded, and because a lot of the weapons they had were given to them by the state as part of the state militia, those weapons are then confiscated and the saints are left defenseless. This is why Brigham Young and the apostles plan their exodus within the year. They want to get out of there. But the mobs keep harassing the saints, and there's a threat of attack in the late summer of 1845. So the apostles go into negotiations with the mobs, and they agree that the mobs will stop harassing the saints, giving them some time to gather things together and get out. But the saints agree that they will leave, or they will start leaving, no later than February of 1846, so middle of winter, one of the coldest months in the area. The original plan was to organize the saints into 25 companies, each company having 100 wagons. That's no longer possible. The saints who are able to leave in February just leave. It's in the middle of winter. The first saints to leave February 4th. Many of them are able to get ferries, pay their way across the river. Not all can pay their way, and there is still, even though the mobs do not actually attack because of this truce that was negotiated, there is still the fear of the mobs, and many people, especially some of the poorer people, they're ready to go, but they can't afford the ferry. So in late February, the river just freezes over. For about a week, it is solid enough to drive wagons across it. Not just have people going off on foot, but they were driving their wagons across the ice of the Mississippi River because it just froze over. And it stayed like that for about a week. Now, in February, we had about, I believe, 1,200 saints cross over into Iowa. They actually travel all the way across Iowa. They don't stop in Iowa. They keep going to the borders of the Indians. The western border of Iowa is a place called Council Bluffs, but that's in Iowa. And the saints don't want to be in those territories. They actually cross into the Indian territory of the Omaha Nation. Now, there is some dispute with the Indians, and so they don't go as far. They originally go, 10 or 12 miles, I believe, west of Council Bluffs. But they get some dispute with the Indians, and they agree to move back east to the shores of the Missouri River, and are only about 4 miles west of Council Bluffs, and this becomes winter quarters. Now, the saints continue to move out, and between February and May, by the time you get to May, about 7,000 saints have crossed the river and moved out to winter, or are on the way to winter quarters. By September, it is estimated somewhere between 12 and 15,000 are in Iowa or have reached winter quarters and are crossing. The last few saints, it's about 600 or 700 in September. These are the poor saints who either are too sick or too poor to get out. And so in September, the mobs do attack the city to drive these remaining few saints out. And it's gunfire, it's also cannon fire, it is a all-out assault on the city. There is some saints who do put up a defense, and they say it's like 4 people are killed and a few dozen are injured, and the saints flee across the river. Many of them are able to get ferries, but it is the final push where the mobs actually drive them out of the city of Nauvoo. The saints, as I say, do cross over Illinois, settling in what becomes known as winter quarters. And this is the gathering place for the saints for the next about 2.5 years. And it becomes a temporary church headquarters where they are able to organize the Western migration. But these are the events that take us from the death, the martyrdom of Joseph Smith and Hyrum, to the exodus from Nauvoo and the Western migration.